America and Australia, we have so many things that are the same but ever so different. You have Hulu, we have Stan. You have sandals, we have thongs. You have a president, we have 5 prime ministers in 5 years. But more importantly, you have so many fast food franchises that it absolutely boggles the mind. For example, we have Hungry Jack's and you have Burger King. And wait a second. I haven't noticed this before. They look exactly the same. What the fuck is going on here? Well, this might actually take a few minutes, but I do actually understand. But let me explain why Hungry Jack's is essentially Burger King, but also why one single court case actually made sure that Hungry Jack's stayed an Australian brand. But look, let's go all the way back to 1953. So, let's take a quick look at Burger King. Now, Burger King started in Jacksonville, Florida, and it was originally called Insta Burger King. Not like that, but pretty close. It was named after the Instamatic machines that were actually used by the McDonald's brothers, who obviously owned McDonald's. And now the original Insta Burger King owners, Keith J. Kramer and Matthew Burns. Now, I couldn't find a photo of them. This is what I imagine what they look like. Put some crowns on them. Okay, cool. Anyway, those two guys, Keith and Matt, they both visited the original Macca's in San Bernardino, and they purchased the rights to 2 of the Insta machines to make their own burgers, shakes, and fries. Now, the reason that they did this was to compete with White Castle, who were expanding their empire on the East Coast. Now, within 6 years, the franchise went from like a little flash in the pan to absolutely faltering. They made some really bad business decisions. And then in 1959, these two guys, 2 Miami franchisees, James McLemore and David R. Edgerton, here's what they look like, they purchased the company to restructure the entire chain. Their first order of business? The name. No longer Insta, just Burger King, and then they changed the burgers by inventing the broiler method, which is actually used to this day. And that's what a broiler looks like. Okay, fast forward a little bit, and then it's 1967, and business is going crazy, and everybody wants a piece of that fast food pie. Now, Burger King, in the US, they've got like 250 locations, and they've done it all in like 8 years, and James and David, they couldn't be more proud. In fact, they're so proud that they get a call from this guy, and, you know, they don't really sort of do much, but they sell the company, but clearly it's big enough because they both served as president and chairman for like most of the 60s and the 70s, but anyway, that's just the Burger King story. Let's pause for a second. Let's go to Canada. Okay, so it's 1969, and this is life insurance salesman Jack Cowin. Again, I couldn't find a picture from that period, but look. Anyway, he's 26 years old, and he's not exactly having the best time of his life. He's selling London life insurance door to door, and he's like bummed out. So let's take me and my wife, and let's go to Sydney, Australia. And Jack is enjoying his vacation. He's like looking at the sights, and he notices that just down from his hotel, there's like a small restaurant with a really big queue. And he investigates, and he sees that there's like all these like takeaway shops, like Chinese stores and like chicken shops, and they're doing like buns of business. And he's like, I gotta figure out what's going on. And so he asks all the people, and he talks to them, and then he heads back to Ontario, and he starts to draft up a business plan because Australia is about to get the biggest fast food injection it's ever seen. So it's eventually December of 1969, and Cowin, who has barely lived in Australia for more than a couple of weeks, has already raised 300,000 Australian dollars in capital from 30 different folks in Western Australia. And he opens 10 KFC stores. He like buys the idea, he buys the franchise, he brings it over to Western Australia, and for those who actually invested the initial $10,000, that single amount now is now worth $8 million. Now, Jack takes his money that like all the investors have put together, he gives it out to all the different franchisees, and then he moves to Australia, even though he's like under 30 and has no idea what the fuck he's doing, except he likes fast food and he wants to bring it to Australia. And then we play the end. Okay, but not too loud. Let's check back with Burger King. Okay, so it's 1971, and like things are going okay, but Pillsbury is trying to make tops and tails of their latest investment. They were making like a whole bunch of money, but I guess it wasn't enough because they start to look for other options for their franchise. They also want to expand for world domination, and they want to invest in Australia. Now play the anthem. It's not that simple. So Burger King is actually already trademarked by this man. This is Don Durbin, and that's his wife Jean. They're very lovely. Don was actually born in the US, specifically in Washington, D.C., and he moved to Adelaide with his wife, and he built his own Burger King stand in Adelaide, like retro style, with girls who are on roller skates, and it's like a drive-in, and it's like classic, and he loves it, and Don's amazing franchise was on fire, and he even trademarked the name. Burger King. In fact, he started the trademark in Australia in 1966, and by 1970, he had 17 Burger King stores all around Australia. He eventually sold his chain of stores to the Burger King founders, but he didn't mention the fact that he's gonna keep the name. So he's got this 30-year trademark ready to go, looking like this, and so frustrated, Burger King has no idea what to do. And then we bring in Jack motherfucking Cowin. Jack meets with the Burger King guys, and he's like, well, you can't have none of that going on, right? You can't have that name? Get a better name. Or something to that effect. Anyway, despite popular belief, Hungry Jack's isn't actually named after Jack Cowin himself. In fact, Burger King subsidiary Pillsbury had a series of acceptable names, and I don't know what acceptable means, and they were actually cool with those names that they were going to use. And so he was looking at all the Pillsbury products, and on the top of Jack's list was a pancake mixture known as Hungry Jack. And then Jack bargained to actually add the apostrophe, so it was like Jack owned it. As they say, the rest is bloody history. But it doesn't stop there. Okay, so between 1971 and 1989, a lot happens. Things are going great for Jack. There's more than 30 different Hungry Jack stores around Australia. Wendy's even tries to break into the Australian market, and they fail, and then Jack purchases their stores in Victoria, and that's how Hungry Jack's makes its way into the eastern states. Anyway, then it's 1990. It's an all-new decade. Burger King meets with Jack, and they talk about their third-party license and renewing the contract. It gets kind of boring here, but please stick with me. Okay, so part of the new contract is this expansion clause, and it's called 2.1. Now, 2.1 is a part of the developmental agreement, and that says Hungry Jack's must open 4 new restaurants in Western Australia, South Australia, and Queensland every year in order to keep the contract intact. In addition to the contract is also clause 4.1, which states any new restaurant is subject to Burger King's operational and financial approval. Now before that, it would have been on Jack, but anyway, Jack agrees and everything is totally fine. And then in 1992, Burger King actually offers to buy out Hungry Jack's in its entirety, but Jack is like, no, not doing this. So in 1993, Jack is trying to keep his promise, that 2.1 to make sure there's 4 new stores, and he partners with Shell. And so then Hungry Jack's start popping up along all the different freeways and highways. And between 93 and 95, they have 7 new stores around the country. And this means if you're ever on the road, you need to stop to get gas, you're probably stopping to get Hungry Jack's as well. Now, there are murmurs in the boardroom as someone is leaking information from Hungry Jack's to Burger King from 1993 all the way up to 1996. Remember how I said that trademark for Burger King was going to run out in 30 years? Well, that time just came. In 1996, everything goes crazy. Alright, so at the exact same time the trademark for Burger King lapses, it just so happens that Burger King is getting real upset with Jack. Coincidence? Okay, well maybe. Now, so this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So Burger King Corporation claims in court documents that Jack and Hungry Jack's were failing to expand the chain despite the fact that multiple franchisees were talking to Jack about opening new stores. Also in that same year, a number of stores are gonna lapse in terms of the agreements that they had. But Jack can't do anything about it because Burger King are now up to renegotiating those new agreements, and it just gets more and more shadier from there. After he signed that contract, Burger King announces that they're not going to renew any of the store franchises, and they lose their jobs, and a whole bunch of stores disappear almost overnight. So from August 1995 to December 2000, Burger King actually freezes Jack on recruiting any new franchises. Jack and his franchisees are actually told explicitly, don't send any information or any packages out to any possible franchisees because some of the information is out of date, and that's totally understandable. But Burger King does nothing to provide any new information or help resolve the issue. It's like if you were taking a history test and you failed because your teacher kept giving you a textbook that Istanbul was actually called Constantinople, and then you tell them, hey, maybe you should update the textbooks because it's 1925, and then they're like, no, we're going to keep you teaching you the textbook. So not only does Burger King hinder the expansion of Hungry Jack's, they straight up refuse to open any new stores, mainly because they don't meet the financial or operational requirements. Despite the fact that Hungry Jack's and their parent company, Competitive Foods, which also owns Domino's and KFC in Australia, were worth over $100 million at that point. By the end of the millennium, Jack has had enough, and he takes Burger King to court. So, During this time, proceedings are pretty swift, and honestly, it was kind of funny to read all of the court proceedings because you have to remember that, like, all these lawyers and their representatives are talking about fast food chains. It's hard to take it very, very serious, but look, I'll try and read some of it here. There's one of my favorite quotes from the case where Stephen Finch, he's representing Hungry Jack's, and he's talking about Burger King's conduct, and I'll try to do it in a serious voice. These are their stories. His Honor has found that Hungry Jack's would have opened, in that period of about 4 years, 14 restaurants a year, if not for Burger King's conduct. To derive a figure for the income which was lost from those 14 restaurants per year, Hungry Jack's expert analyzed 3 samples of existing restaurants which had been built up until that point. Burger King's experts analyzed only 1 of these 3 samples. Now again, this is all because they brought in an expert accountant to look at Hungry Jack's and the way that they were running their businesses, which was actually at a pretty high efficiency, and then Burger King stepped in with their practices based in those clauses. In fact, there's another clause called 8.1, which if Hungry Jack's failed to build those extra restaurants, they would be given an extra 12 months to fix and sort their shit out. It was so weird to read through this case. Like, it actually created what is known as a good faith principle example. And that's what that sounds like. A good faith principle was actually brought into the legal agreement so both parties could do their absolute best in their business practices, but one of them didn't uphold the deal. Adrian Barron, arguing for Hungry Jack's, actually notes in the developmental contract that there was an implication of a term of good faith because it tends to disregard the reality that, at least in commercial contexts, both parties pursue their own commercial interests and enter into terms that reflect the risk and benefits that each party is prepared to bear. Again, it's crazy to read like how serious this kind of stuff is. Barron actually argued that in 1990, when the parties entered the developmental agreement, he said, it would have been plain to Hungry Jack's that if certain events occurred, Burger King could, at its option, terminate the contract. But they didn't. And the contract sufficiently identified the circumstances warranting the termination of that contract. And the lawyers go back and forth, and basically both companies don't have to be such big dicks when working in an open free trade market. That's what the good faith principle means. And Burger King even considers to settle for Hungry Jack's to rebrand their franchises to Burger King as a final ditch effort. Jack is having none of that at all. And then, on June 21st, 2001, there's finally a verdict. Not only was Burger King totally in the wrong, but the practices of good faith were called into question multiple times. After the lengthy High Court battle, the Australian judges ruled that Burger King had to pay $75 million for breach of franchise agreements. Now, shortly after that, Burger King actually agrees to help unlock the potential for like 100 new Hungry Jack's restaurants. It also says that they're going to invest $150 million to Australia's Hungry Jack's chain. So since then, Hungry Jack's has actually grown into a billion-dollar company. In fact, it made a profit of like $30 million in the last 2 years. And all thanks to this man, Jack Cowin. Jack Cowin is now 76 years of age and is worth $1.8 billion. Thanks to this one Canadian man, we have our own Aussie brand of fast food, Hungry Jack's, and it's going stronger than ever before. And now a word from a man who has helped make Hungry Jack's even better than it already is. This is Aaron Gocs.
And so that's the story of Hungry Jack's. I'm Aaron, #1 Hungry Jack's supporter Gocs, and now you can go on to look at other things on the internet. I'm sure you'll find some other great things around. There's plenty of cat videos, memes. Everyone loves a meme. You can stream some music or a movie. There's plenty of things to do. Yeah, look, you'll find something. There's some trash out there actually, so you know, do whatever you want to.
Usually I don't get fast food, but it's so good. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm gonna finish this. I forgot how big they were.